Hi, folks. Welcome back. We are at episode 4 of our Beyond Human in the Loop series. And today we are going to look at a concept that is very central to this whole notion of Beyond Human in the Loop. And that concept is situation awareness. If this is your first time here, just to catch you up, in this video series, we are looking at the older, deeper literature on how humans interact with automation, whether it is machines or trains or planes or factories, and these days, even cognitive knowledge work. And we are trying to see what we can learn from all that previous literature that we can then apply to this current wave of using AI and agents and all this new stuff to automating cognitive knowledge work. All right, so the things we're talking about today are based on this paper called Automation and Situation Awareness by Micah Ensley. This is from 1996. And this paper is talking about what price we pay as humans when we successfully automate things. So, yes, automation, as the author himself points out here, it does give us a lot of benefits, but there is no free lunch, like he says over here. However, a certain price has been extracted. And that price is what someone else in the literature called, amusingly enough, the lumberjack effect. And what that means is the higher the automation climbs, the further the human automation combined system can fall when it fails. And my last episode, if you saw it, where I spoke about the role, the things we can learn from aviation disasters will maybe seem a bit more apt because right here on the front page, the author lists 1, 2, 3 major aviation disasters where automation was either the main cause or played a part in the accident. So before we go any further, we should define what situation awareness is. What does it mean? I'm just going to read the definition from the paper because I think that's a really good definition. Situation awareness is formally defined as the perception of the elements in the environment within a volume of time and space, and then the comprehension of their meaning, which finally lets us perform a projection of their status in the near future. And this term directly comes from the aircraft pilot community. And you can view these three things as increasing levels 1, 2, and 3, increasing levels of situation awareness. When you're perceiving things, you're just getting very raw knowledge or very raw information, rather, about the environment. These are things like your position or what alarms are active or the level of the fuel. Using all this raw knowledge, you can then try to understand the meaning of that situation. So you might learn from that your velocity is too high or too low, or maybe your acceleration is not enough, or that your fuel level is not enough to get to your destination, and so on. So you perceive some raw information and then you proceed to comprehend its meaning. And finally, level 3 is projection, where you try to take this understanding and project it forward in time. This might be considered to be the whole point. The whole reason you're trying to understand the state of the world is so that you can make some future projection to see what your position is going to be, whether you are going to go into or out of an unsafe situation, or whether things are perfectly normal. You want to be able to say something about how the situation will unfold. You want to be aware of what the situation is and will be. Note that all of these things are affected by your goal. The things that you pay attention to, the things that you even perceive, or the way you limit your perception to certain things, because you have to limit your perception. There's too many things usually to pay attention to. And then how you move towards understanding and projection is completely shaped by your goals. The way you go through these levels will be very different depending on, say, whether your goal is to take off or land or attack an enemy plane or something else. All right, so then the question becomes, what is the impact of automation on situation awareness? That's the topic we're trying to focus on in this series. And ironically enough, the author calls this the out of the loop problem. Because what the author is saying here is, look, the human actually is getting pushed out of the loop as you increase the degree of automation. And this causes three main issues, or the mechanisms via which automation affects situation awareness. There are three main mechanisms. The first one is complacency, and we talked about this when we were talking about Bainbridge's paper on the ironies of automation. This directly has to do with humans becoming monitors when they simply have to be vigilant of the situation. And usually what this results in is just rubber stamping. They become complacent, they rely too much on automation. And this directly yields to the common problem we see of automation surprise. This is essentially what's happening in a lot of these aviation accidents. Automation surprise happens when, because you're used to the automation usually working well, you simply monitor it, you become complacent, but when something goes wrong, rarely, you are surprised by that and struggle to maintain situation awareness. The second mechanism is active versus passive, whether the human is playing an active role in the decision making and the control of the system, or whether they're playing a passive or reactive role. And the third very important factor or mechanism is feedback given to the human. Both the quality as well as the form of the feedback. Very often it happens in automated systems that because of the way the user interface is designed, the feedback takes on a more impoverished quality. It is not as rich as the feedback that the human operator used to get before automation. And they have a really beautiful example in the paper. Before autopilot, pilots were directly physically controlling some of the control surfaces with the sticks, mechanical sticks in the cockpit, and they could feel the vibration, they could feel how much force it took to move the stick. So they had all these rich physical cues, physical forms of feedback. And one very commonly expressed complaint of pilots in the age of automation and autopilot was that when you do fly-by-wire, all these physical cues go away. And they actually tried to bring some of those back with things like stick shakers. Even though it was fly-by-wire, they tried to add some feedback, some physical feedback into these control instruments. So this feedback and the presentation of information to the human operator is a very important part of helping them maintain situation awareness. One very important thing the author points out is that automation very often increases the complexity of the system. If I can spell this over here. And how does that happen? It happens because automation introduces its own new variables and state to the system that need new understanding. So, for example, without automation, a pilot would have to think about position and velocity and acceleration and altitude and so on. But when you introduce something like autopilot, the pilot then also has to understand how autopilot works. And autopilot itself is a fairly complex piece of automation. It has things like modes, it has things like overrides or exceptions, it has alarms. So, in addition to knowing about all these basic physical variables, the pilot now also has to understand what autopilot is doing, how autopilot works, and what state this whole new autopilot system is in. So, that's an important thing to keep in mind, that automation will very often increase the overall complexity of this combined system that the human has to operate and understand and deal with. So, what's the solution? And the author himself in the paper doesn't quite provide a full solution, but talks about the initial ideas of a solution. And the idea is to do what they call adaptive automation, such that you want the human to be involved in this decision-making loop in a way that their overall workload is still reduced. So you want to take away the workload of doing some of the very repetitive manual things, but still keep them in the decision-making loop while maintaining situation awareness. And what the author is saying is the way to do that is to dynamically or adaptively change which tasks go to the human versus the automation. And just like that children of the magenta line clip we saw in the previous video, very often the answer is to drop down a level of automation. In other words, you have to match the level of automation to the situation or the task at hand. It isn't always the right answer to go to the very highest level of automation. All right, I'll wrap up with that. Stay tuned for more in this series. If you like content like this, consider subscribing, like the video, leave me a comment if you're making some connections to how all these ideas can be applied to what we are doing today with AI in knowledge work. All right, thanks. I'll see you in the next one.